thank y'all for coming this morning to hear two very important issues that are facing us right now. It's almost like preaching to the choir. Y'all hear us talk about these things every day. But in 2008, when our administration took over, we established 8 executive goals that we wanted to meet. And one of those goals was that flood protection for everybody, every citizen in St. Charles Parish. So what Buddy's going to present to you today are 2 propositions that we're getting ready to go out on May the 2nd. One is a renewal of the existing wastewater millage, and the other one is a 3.6 mills for the new funding for the hurricane protection levees on both sides of the rivers. Since we've been here in 2008, I've been going to Washington every year, 3 or 4 or 5 times a year sometimes, trying to get federal dollars to build these levees, because a $300 million levee system, we can't fund. St. Charles Parish just don't have that kind of money. But anyhow, we haven't been able to get that money, so Washington's broke. Okay, there's no more earmarks, and there's no money in the water bill for new funding for levees. So if we're going to have a chance to build any kind of levee, we got to do it internally. We got to come up with enough funding to build our levees, and hopefully Holiday can get some matching funds to complete the whole system, because we're talking about $300 million. This millage that we actually go out for is between $87 and $150 million. So we need to make sure that we get some grant funding. So
we'll get started with what we think is the easiest one to explain, which is the wastewater millage, and that is proposition number 2 on that ballot that's in your hands right now. And the reason we're asking the public for this renewal, which means it'll stay on the property tax bills, it's currently there on the property tax bills, is because for the past 8 years, those are the fund balances of our wastewater department. And as you can see, there's more red than black, and that's a problem. And that's despite over $7.5 million being transferred from the general fund to the wastewater department just to keep the lights on and operate the department on a daily basis. On average, on each of these years, we only spent about $500,000 on capital projects. Those are the big projects, the new projects, or the big, huge maintenance and repair things that we have to do during a year, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the reason we're in this predicament, despite having some of the highest user rates throughout the region, and the reason for that is because we get those complaints every now and then that sewer rates are so high in St. Charles compared to our neighbors or relatives in other areas. In other parishes, the wastewater, the water departments, most of the time they're subsidized by either a property or sales tax. In St. Charles, it is strictly the user fee, the thing on your monthly bill. That's all we get to operate the department off of. So what we're asking the voters to consider, and you all, is on May 2nd to allow us to begin having a property tax help pay the bill for the wastewater department. So despite the transfers year after year, the other problem that caused us to stay in the red is that for the past 15 years, so since 2000, the parish president, regardless of who was in office, did not raise the sewer rates for 7 out of those 15 years. And anybody with an investment or a mutual fund or an IRA or your deferred comp, you know that your investment grows over time, and that compound interest works in your favor. So if you put $1 in today and it sits there for 15 years, that money grows. Our problem is those 8 years that didn't have rate increases, we lost that opportunity for that money to grow, and that's why we're in the position we are today. We get asked a bunch of times as we've been going to the public, because we've presented this presentation many times to small groups and large groups, well, y'all just need to cut expenses. You need to shrink your department. The department's out of control. 10 years ago, the wastewater department had 59 employees. Today, it's got 54. So this department is actually smaller than it was 10 years ago. This is not a department that's run amok. It's not a department that is out of control. It has tried to stay within its means as best as possible. But what's happening is that the resident, you all, homeowners, are using less water. And we bill based on how much you use. We don't just bill you a flat amount. So in 1990, the average user used 7,600 gallons every month of water. 7,600 gallons in the early 90s. Today, they use 4,700. So they're almost using half as much water. But our system, the pipes, the lift stations, the plants, the employees, the trucks, and everything else that goes with it, That hasn't shrunk. It hasn't gone by half. In fact, it's grown. So the system has to be maintained. It has to be operated. But the usage is going down. The rates weren't raised every year, and that's why we're in the position we're in today. The other problem with those transfers from the general fund is that we also transfer from the general fund to help pay for the levy. And so when you transfer for wastewater and you transfer from the levy, what happens is the general fund gets really, really tight. And that's what that's what's been happening the past couple of budget cycles. As you all know, if you've watched or helped put together department budgets, that general fund keeps getting tighter as we move forward. I mentioned earlier that all we've done is about $500,000 a year in capital projects over time, but we asked Sam and LJ, Sam's over Public Works and LJ runs wastewater, to come up with a 10-year plan of what needs to be done moving forward to keep this system operating, maintained, and handling the growth that we expect over the next 10 to 20 years in St. Charles Parish on both sides of the river. And what they came up with is almost over $41 million in capital projects needs, most of which are under the ground, and unfortunately you'll never see, but that's the infiltration and inflow repairs you see on that screen that total almost $23 million. And that's because we've got 1.4 million linear feet of sewer pipes throughout the parish, down every street and every community, that need to be repaired or replaced. So what happens is, yesterday when we have rain for hours and hours and hours, our sewer system becomes part of the drainage system because the pipes are cracked, they're disjointed, they're leaking, and the water gets into our system, which backs up into people's homes, unfortunately at times. In the streets, the ditches, lift stations get over capacity and cause sewage to back up, or our treatment plants, the oxidation ponds and the plants in Hahnville and Destrehan, they operate over capacity, and they cost 2 to 3 times as much to operate during those times. So we're proposing doing about $23 million in replacement and repairs to the pipes under the ground, because when you repair those pipes, that's fewer overtimes. Every time you don't have a house get sewage backed up into it, that's less you have to repair in a home. And when our treatment plants yesterday, LJ's treatment plants, they operated 3 times over capacity. That was 3 times the electricity, 3 times the chemicals, 3 times everything it takes to treat that wastewater. So if we repair these things, we save money on that end also. The next category that we're proposing is an upgrading and a dredging of the Luling oxidation pond. So that is a pond in the Luling area that was built over 50 years ago and has not been dredged in over 50 years. So over time, it's been filling up and we've been losing capacity. So we're proposing about $5 million to go in and dredge that pond, put it back at the capacity it was designed for, and let it last another 30 to 50 years into the future. And then we're proposing another oxidation be built in the oxidation pond be built in the Parish area. We haven't identified the exact location, but we do propose that another pond be built so that the treatment that's being sent to Hahnville can be shifted to some Parish, or some of the treatment can be shifted to Parish, which will allow the Hahnville treatment plant to last longer. You take some pressure off of it, that equipment lasts longer. So we're proposing that that be built to diversify the treatment capacity on the West Bank. The other reason is we've actually hit capacity on the West Bank. We've had to tell some businesses and industries that we can't take their wastewater. So because we can't handle capacity today, we're telling these industries, build your own treatment plant because we can't handle your sewage. But what we're really telling them, and what we're telling Grant in our finance department, is we're telling them no for the next 30 years as being a customer. And so we're saying no to that revenue, that bill we would send them every month. So if we upgrade our system, if we maintain the system and expand it a little bit, we take these industries in today, and that's 30 years worth of revenue so that we don't get into the red. The last 2 categories that make up that $41 million are some lift station upgrades and some new lift stations being put throughout the parish in the Ama, Kelowna, Muntz, Norco, Dufferin Park, and Primrose areas. The lift stations move the sewage from the neighborhoods through the bigger lines and get it to the treatment facility. So those operating and being big enough to handle the sewage they need to move is key. If they get over capacity and shut down, sewage starts to back up. The last bucket is sort of the day-to-day items that we need just to operate the department, which is a 24/7, 365 department. LJ's asked for a vacuum truck for the past 3 years, about $350,000. For the past 3 years, he's asked for it, and every year we've had to take it out of the budget because we just do not have the funds. The last 3 years, y'all saw, we've been in the red over $1 million a year. but the sewage department needs a vacuum truck. The vehicles in that department need to be replaced like every other vehicle throughout the parish fleet on a yearly or mileage schedule. And then we're proposing some new lines be placed in the Moselle at a Parity area and in St. Rose. That's a picture, it's really gross, of what happens when wastewater backs up into your home, your front yard, or your street. One time is too many, whether it's you or your neighbor or your relative or your street. And it shouldn't happen in 2015 or 2017 or 2020 in a community like St. Charles Parish. We should maintain, expand, and fully repair our system so that we don't have to have this happen moving forward. So we asked the Finance Department to put together a 5-year schedule looking out. What do the wastewater finances look like 5 years from now, with or without the millage? Because what we're trying to do here today is just educate you so that you can make a yes or no vote on May 2nd or next week for early voting. So the right of that line, with all the red, that's what happens if the millage doesn't pass. We get to a pattern of having negative $2 million a year in that fund balance. So what that means is we have to put $2 million a year at least from the general fund just to keep the lights on in the wastewater department. Now that number, those numbers to the right don't include any of that $41 million of projects, and that's the biggest problem. So we need $2 million a year just to operate the department. Meanwhile, we still are going to go another 4, 8, 10, 15 years without maintaining the system, and the system at some point will break and we'll have to find the money, and that's when you run into real problems. So that general fund transfer will continue to grow, which ties the hands of future administrations, ties the hands of future council members to do the other projects and services that government is supposed to do. The left side of that line is what happens if the millage passes. And as you can see in 2016, which will be the first year that the millage revenue is available, the department gets much healthier financially, and by 2017 we project that most of the debt that the department is currently in will be paid back, and it's in 2017 that we believe the future administration and council will be able to, for the first time in decades, lower sewer rates. And that's where we're trying to get this parish into a position like other parishes where we can start seeing lower monthly sewer rates, because finally we have a property tax helping to subsidize the department on a daily basis. So these are very rough projections, but give or take a bit, this is where the department ends up in the next 5 years, with or without the millage. So this language is on that ballot in front of you, and pick up a copy if you have it on the way out. But the basic crux of it is in the middle, and it's highlighted in yellow on your document. For the purpose of paying any costs associated with acquiring, constructing, improving, maintaining, and operating wastewater facilities and systems in the parish. It's only for wastewater, and we've been driving that point home every time we meet with the public. This is not recreation, it's not water, it's not any other department inside of general government. It's strictly wastewater. This is a renewal. It's already on your property taxes. All you're doing is saying we would like it to continue so that we'll have the money and the bonding capacity, because that's one thing this language will allow us to do. The parish will be able to bond out financing or take out a loan to do those bigger projects, and then the leftover money that's left over every year will go to the department so that we can start subsidizing it and eventually lower rates over time. So as you can see, this doesn't change your property tax bill. Whatever you're paying today, if you say yes to this on May 2nd, or if the public does, it doesn't change how much you will pay in property taxes. All it does is give the parish the ability to bond out and do those major repairs and help subsidize the department to some degree to lower rates into the future. 30-year renewal, like I said earlier, no new cost to the taxpayers, and the bonding capacity that this parish would have to do those bigger projects, we are told by our bond attorney, is about $47 million. Now that's an estimate over the next 10 years. But we have about $41 million in needs that we know of today, and so we've got the capacity to do those repairs over the next 10 years. So we get asked, why now? Why did we send it this year, not next year, not 5 years from now? Why didn't we just increase the rates a little bit? Well, first of all, to have rates pay for what we need to do, rates would almost probably have to double. And that's just impractical and probably not going to happen if it's up to a council and parish president coming in next term. But the cost of the system, like I said, people are using less, but the system is still there. The pipes, the lift stations, the plants, those costs keep going up every year. The rate increases because we didn't do them in those past years, and because in future years it's still going to be a tough decision to raise rates. We feel this property tax will help subsidize the department, Capital expenses, that's the bigger projects. We haven't done them in the past. There was no money. And if the millage doesn't pass, we can't do them in the future. There won't be the money. It'll have to come out of general fund or some other department. Systems at capacity, that's kind of an economic development thing. If we can't handle future growth, that's a problem, and we need to fix that, and it's our responsibility to do that, and this is how we plan to do it into the future. General fund transfers, again, $2 million a year, that'll become consistent. So before the budget's even touched by anybody, $2 million will get taken out and put into wastewater, because that's what we'll need just to pay the light bill. And the current deficit this year, and this presentation was put together several months ago, was $3.9 million. It's probably a little bit more now if we ran that number, a little bit over $4 million. So that debt continues to grow, and we've got to fix that moving forward. I'll touch on that last bullet at the end of the presentation. So that's the wastewater. No new taxes, a renewal, and allows the department to lower rates over time and do those bigger projects. The other proposition, the first one on that ballot, the left side, Proposition 1, is our flood protection proposal. And this is the new tax. This is the one that we're asking the public to consider to finance the construction and operation and maintenance of a full flood protection system. And on the map that you have in front of you, on the side with all the white boxes, that is the wastewater project map. I should have pointed that out earlier. I'm sorry. So you can go through and see where all of those projects we talked about are located and how much we anticipate them costing. But on the flip side, and that's what I'd like you to look at now, is the bird's eye view of the comprehensive flood protection and drainage system for St. Charles Parish that we're working towards. So in the past, we heard about these levees. In the past, we heard about these pump stations, and I'm going back 10, 20 years. Now it's a system on a map. Most of it's permitted, a lot of it is designed, and we're working on getting most of it into the master plan, and we'll go through it really quickly so that you understand what we're talking about in the next couple of slides. The bottom right portion on the West Bank, that's called the West Bank and Vicinity, or Western Tie-In. That was built by the Corps. It was built to protect Orleans and Jefferson, but they came into St. Charles and protected AMA to get to the Davis Pond diversion, which is the part that goes and meets the Mississippi River. So that was built by the federal government. If you move along that green line, you hit a light blue line. That's the Willow Ridge portion. We broke ground on that about 14 months ago. We expect to complete that in about 6 or 7 weeks. That's the Willow Ridge reach of the levee, and there's a black dot in that light blue section. That's the Willow Ridge pump station. We plan on going out to bid for that later this summer. If you keep going along that line, there's a darker blue section. That's the Ellington reach. 2 miles of that levee will go out to bid later this summer. Money is in the budget. Project's ready to go, and we'll start construction later this year. And there's another pump station proposed. That's that black dot. The black dots are new pump stations. The white dots are existing pump stations throughout the parish. If you keep following that blue, it gets lighter again. That's the Magnolia Ridge levee. Part of that levee is there. It's not high enough. It's got to be finished. It's got to be raised and made stronger and wider. But then it meets the Sunset levee at the Paradis Canal, where we will build another pump station and flood control structure. The Sunset levee, you all know, in 2013, the parish became the governing authority of the Sunset Drainage District. With that, we got 13 miles of levees. They work. They were built over 100 years ago. They've kept that area dry, but they were not built in FEMA or Corps standards and methods. And so we have to analyze that levee and in some parts raise it, some parts rebuild it to make FEMA happy for flood insurance purposes. So that's why we have that on the map, because there will be some improvements that are built in addition to a new pump station that we're proposing, that black circle on the red line. If you keep following the red line, it meets Bayou des Allemands. And at Bayou des Allemands, it forks. That doesn't mean we're building 2 levees. That means those options are being studied by the state, and we expect to have an answer by the end of June of which one we follow. So we prefer the yellow line. So the Sunset levee would meet that black dot in Bayou des Allemands. That would be a massive floodgate and pumping station. And then that floodgate would connect to a levee, which is that yellow line, that would protect Highway 90 and go all the way through Lafourche Parish and meet Highway 308. We prefer that alignment, and we'll talk about that, the reasons why, a little bit later. It protects 6 parishes. Plus, we're done after that flood control structure, and then Lafourche Parish takes it from there and continues to build it. So St. Charles would stop at that black dot in Bayou des Allemands. But the other option being studied by the state, and it's being studied to determine which one will be put into the master plan, is that orange line that whips back towards the river and then ties into a natural ridge upriver of the jail on 3127. It's pretty obviously why we don't prefer that alignment. It's miles of levees, and it's 2 more pump stations. So we would prefer closing off the bayou and building that levee along Highway 90 to Highway 308. Protecting Highway 90 also protects that as an evacuation route. And Highway 90 and Highway 3127 are key evacuation routes, not just for us, but for all of South Louisiana as they evacuate ahead of a storm. And so that orange line would include 2 more pump stations also. If you flip to the East Bank, that green line, another federal levee, built by the Army Corps of Engineers after Katrina. It was started right before Katrina, but it was really finished and paid for after Katrina, and goes from the Jefferson Parish line all the way to the spillway. But if you notice, there's one more black dot. We need, and it was evident yesterday in the St. Rose area, another pumping station to be built in St. Rose to the tune of between $12 and $15 million. Another, along that green line, there's one of those white circles, is the Cross Bayou Pump Station, one of the largest pump stations in the parish. It drains most of the East Bank. That has to be maintained and operated. But if you follow the green, it meets the spillway. Then if you hop onto the other side of the spillway, you get to that light blue line. That is the West Shore Levee. If you remember in the newspaper and in the news last year, the West Shore Levee, which is the portion of the levee that protects Muntz, all of St. John, and parts of St. James, is a Corps levee. It's being studied by the Corps, and late last year it got a kind of halfway rubber stamp of approval. We expect the final approval from the Corps by the end of May. At that point, it's an official project, but there's not a dollar yet allocated to that project. That blue line has been studied by the Army Corps of Engineers since 1968. And today, they still don't have $1 for dirt. This is why we feel the local government has to continue building levees. We've got to do this, because if we wait on D.C., we'll be waiting for decades, not years. So if you flip, all of those, and if you keep looking at the map, all of those lines and dots have costs associated with them. So how do we project and propose to pay for that system, which is very expensive? And that's by asking the voters on May 2nd to consider a $4 million new property tax being placed on the property tax bills that would allow us to do the same thing like wastewater. We would be able to bond against it for construction of big projects, and we'd be able to pay for the operations and maintenance of the department on an annual basis with the revenue that the tax generates also. All in that big paragraph boils down to that last couple of lines, which reads, "For the purpose of paying any costs associated with constructing, acquiring, maintaining, operating, extending, and or improving levees, facilities, and structures associated with the outer flood protection systems." We met with residents, we met with the council. It was very important that that word outer was put in there. And what that means is that any of this money from this tax can only be spent on these lines on this map. Can't spend it on recreation. Sam can't even spend it on another public works project that he needs in another department, in another area. It can only be spent on levees, T-walls, pump stations, those sorts of things. And again, that was done to give the public the confidence and the assurance to know that their money would be spent for what they voted for. The summary is that this is just like wastewater. It's a 30-year tax, and the reason we did that is this system will take 10 to 15 years to build over time, and the bonds need about 20 years, the bond, to be paid back. And so we need 30 years to construct the project and pay back the loan that it will take to build it. You notice up there on the previous slide I said 4 mils, and up here I have 3.6. That's because we're going to propose to the council in August to lower the road lighting millage by 0.4. Currently there's a tax on your property tax bill to pay for lights along the roads. We pay those bills. It's collecting a little bit more money than it needs to right now, so we're proposing to lower it by 0.4 to reduce the cost of this new tax we're asking the voters to consider. So when you factor in that reduction, the average cost of what we're asking the voters to vote on May 2nd is $36 a year to the average homeowner. Average home is about $175,000. When you take out homestead exemption, it's about $36 a year, or $3 a month, or basically less than a tank of gas, to help this parish over the next 10 to 15 years finance, operate, and maintain a flood protection system for both sides of the river that makes FEMA happy for flood insurance purposes. It also will allow us to bond between $87 million and $120 million in local bonds that Holly and Sam can then match with state dollars and build this system, and we'll get into that in a little bit. This slide, and I'll go through it really quickly, it basically just explains why we prefer Highway 308 rather than coming back and tying in by the jail. The top right is what happens when a storm comes through and the water and the surge fills the Lake des Allemands drainage basin, because there are levees in Lafourche Parish, there are levees in Jefferson and Plaquemines, and we unfortunately become the funnel for that surge. So the second slide, if you see it becomes green halfway through, that's building that levee along Highway 90 and closing off the bayou. Then you protect all of those parishes, St. Charles, John, James, Ascension, Assumption, and Lafourche parishes, plus Highway 90. So that's why we support that proposal. It makes a lot more sense for the region, it makes a lot more sense for us, it makes a lot more sense for evacuation purposes, and it's probably cheaper at the end of the day once we do final design. The bottom right is what happens if we whip back and tie towards 3127 near the jail. You can see a little bitty portion of St. Charles is protected, where the people live, but then the rest of it is still a funnel for the rest, for all the water coming in a storm. So we propose closing off that gap with that Highway 308 alignment. Sam wanted to include these slides just to show we've seen this. Our communities have had water in the roads several feet deep. We've had some homes take on water. We've had some homes get within inches of taking on water. Most of these pictures are Hurricane Isaac, which we know what they did to Laplace because they've been waiting on D.C. These are pictures in months. And so we're proposing this millage so that we can start construction on these projects and prevent this from happening. And then some of these pictures are Hurricane Ike on the West Bank in the bayou with HESCO baskets protecting Bayou des Allemands from getting into the communities. So we've got 3 projects going out to bid this year. Money's in the bank. It's designed. We're ready to rock and roll and start construction. And those projects are the Willow Ridge Pump Station, the Willowdale Pump Station tie-in, because the levee, the dirt portion comes close to the pump station. Now we have to tie the levee into it. The tie-in to the Davis Pond diversion, which is the green line, and then 2 miles of the Ellington levee, one of those blue lines I talked about on the map. These projects are budgeted, but once they go out to bid, the Hurricane Protection Fund, which the council and administration over the past 7 years have put over $31 million towards flood protection, design, mitigation, permitting, and then construction. But all that money's gone now once these projects go out to bid. So unless we find another revenue source, another way to finance these projects, the construction of the system comes to a halt after these projects. And these are the systems that are, some of them are fully designed, some are almost finished design, and then others are being studied right now and will be ready in the coming years, but they're waiting on money. And so we will have projects ready to go, but not the money to build them. So that's improving the Sunset Levee, the Almedia Walker pump stations in St. Rose, the Ellington pump station, the Paradis Canal closure structure, Magnolia Ridge getting a pump station and its levee being improved, the Prescott Canal pump station, West Shore Lake Pontchartrain, that's the portion that would protect months. And then also we've got 2 pipeline crossings. Pipelines are under the ground, but we can't put a dirt levee over them. We have to build a T-wall, and so those have to still be designed. But all of these come with a cost. And that's what this slide sums up. Ellington still has $45 million in costs coming up. Magnolia, $60 million. Sunset, we estimate about $75 million just in the Sunset area. Whether we build the floodgate or go back up towards the river, we're looking at $88 million minimum for that floodgate and pump station or that levee that goes back towards the river. Months is about $20 million for that pump station and just the little bitty portion of the dirt levee that's in St. Charles Parish. And then that pump station in St. Rose is between 10 and 15 million. Our portion is going to be closer to 10. Pontchartrain Levee District will pay another portion. So that's construction. Those are the big projects. The only way to finance those are transfers out of the general fund, which don't come often because you have to have extra money to do that, or we can bond them, and we'll get to that in 2 slides. But the other reason we're asking the voters to consider this and do 2 things: pay for us to be able to have bonding capacity, but also money to operate and maintain this system, is that these costs are hitting the departments today. Sam's budget, the Public Works Drainage Department, spends 19.5% this year on flood protection projects. 8 years ago, They didn't have to do that. That went to other things Public Works did. Now it's going to flood protection, and that number will grow year after year unless we find another source of revenue to help pay for those things. So in the East Bank, we expect the fuel and operations and maintenance costs to get towards $1 million a year. On the West Bank, it's almost $2 million a year. And for that green portion on the West Bank of the river, that we estimate is going to be between $250,000 and $500,000 a year, and we're currently negotiating with the Corps how much we have to set aside per year in a locked account just to have the money in case anything breaks into the future. So for an example, 4 weeks ago, we had a 3-day rain event, and this week we'll have many rain events. We had a 4-day rain event. Cross Bayou, which is one of those white dots on the East Bank, largest pump station in the parish, the fuel bill for that one rainstorm was $30,000. So every time we build one of those circles on that map, we estimate it's $80,000 to $120,000 per year in fuel. But once you close off a system, you've got to pump the water over it. So every time we go out to bid on one of these pump stations, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for this system moving forward. And if St. Charles wants a flood protection system that drains itself and stops storm surge, then we've got to have the money to pay for not only the dirt and the construction, but also on the operations and maintenance. That same pump station on the West Bank, Cross Bayou, it's got 2 pumps in it. Each one is $1.2 million a year, $1 million to replace it. So in 10, 15 years when those pumps need to be replaced, we have to have that money because you don't want it to break and you don't want it to be out of commission for months at a time while you order a pump. And you can't budget that kind of expense. You can't say, well, we'll fix it next year. When you're ready to replace it, you've got to have the money in the bank. So we're estimating that for all of those pump stations, we need to set money aside every year to the tune of about $150,000 to $200,000 a year, put it in an account so that when these pumps need to be replaced, we can replace them so that during these rain events like this week where we have 7 days of rain and those pump stations need to work, those pumps will work. And that everyone can go to sleep knowing that it's moving the water. And then we've got some other costs associated with lifting levees every 5 to 10 years and making sure the floodgates operate. But we're trying to get from this left side of this slide, which is hoping and praying that the right storm doesn't come, which we do every hurricane season, and hoping and praying that money does, which we do every time a plant expands. We get all excited because we have a few extra dollars and we can put some money into the hurricane account. And getting to the right side of this slide, which is just building flood protection with a dedicated source of revenue, with bonding capacity that we can leverage with state money and get to a position where we're just protecting our people. This is the Willow Ridge Levee, which is being built to Corps and FEMA standards, which means at some point in the future it will be put on a flood map and lower flood insurance. That's how we have to build levees into the future. We can't just go throw dirt in a pile anymore. We have to design them to Corps standards, and that costs a little bit more money, but that's how we keep flood insurance low moving forward. I'm going to go through these really quickly and get to Holly's slides. We asked the Public Works Department to go out 10 years on their financing and figure out what their budget looks like if we don't pass this millage. So this is without the millage, but with all flood protection costs being wrapped in as we build this system. But this is with no capital projects, so we stop doing any projects in Public Works, which is not going to happen, but let's imagine we do. We still get to negative $12 million in a fund balance if we keep building the flood system the way we're going. So that's not practical and it's not financially feasible. So then we said, okay, we're not just going to do zero. Let's go throw $6.5 million per year in capital projects. The average that Sam and VJ have done since they came into office is $11.3 million. But we went with half of that, and the fund balance gets to negative 70. Now, again, that's not practical, so what will happen? Flood protection will stop being built because there just won't be the money for it. So this is where we're facing the decision as a community. Do we want to dedicate money to keep building and moving forward on this flood system, or do we want to put future councils in this position of having to choose between this project or that project? It's our belief they all need to be built, they all need to be operated and maintained, and the only way to do that is this millage, we believe at this time, that gives us the money to operate and maintain it on an annual basis, but the bonding capacity to leverage with state dollars, and I'll let Holly explain that math.
We thank you all for attending and hope you'll bring this information back to your coworkers who weren't able to attend any of these sessions. If you've worked for the parish government in virtually any department over the past 7 years, since 2008 through the end of last year, then you played a role in at least one of 96 grant projects that we completed for a total cost of $71 million. Of the $71 million, only $14 million was our local tax dollars. We were able to leverage state and federal grant funding, $57 million worth, to complete those 96 projects. So you can imagine if we'd only had the 14 million, we'd have only completed a fraction of those 96 projects. And that is the very same concept that we are applying to levee and flood protection projects. What I tried to show here is our past history since 2008 on levee and flood protection projects. We've spent $16.5 million. Of that 16.5, 9.1 million was grant funding, aside from the 57 million I told you about before. What that means is for every one of our tax dollars, we were able to get $1.39 in state and federal grant funding, which is pretty good. For the upcoming projects, you heard Buddy mention that we're going to be advertising for bids this year. And once those projects are done, the funding that will be depleted is the $19 million that we've got currently committed in state grant agreements, and then the $20.6 million that our parish council set aside for levee flood protection projects. And that ratio is a little bit lower. It's 91 cents for every one of our dollars. But the average that you see in the bottom right-hand box is that we've projecting to have received $1.03 for every one of our dollars, and that's not bad. What I wanted to show here is possible scenarios that we can attain with our leveraging efforts. The first one is the 87 million in bonds, which is what our parish bond attorney's conservative estimate is at this time for our bonding capacity if this millage is approved. If we use that lowest 0.91 ratio, we could potentially see 79 million in state and federal grant funding for a total of 166 million. An average estimate, if we happen to see some spikes in tax revenue, our bonding capacity could potentially increase, let's say 100 million. Using that average ratio of $1.03 for every one of our dollars, then we could potentially see 103 million in state and federal grant funding. So that's a total of 203 million. But the ultimate scenario that we're going to be working towards is that last one. So 120 million possible spikes with tax revenue. We think it's possible with that $1.39 ratio, which is our past history ratio of what we've been able to leverage, would generate 167 million in state or federal grants, total of 287 million. That's how we're planning to fund this nearly $300 million levee project. You might ask, well, what sources you're going to get that funding from? We have some state sources. We work really close with our levee districts. Levee districts will help us with cost shares on these projects, and also work with them to get funding from the CPRA, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. Of that 28 million on the previous slide that we've gotten so far in grant funding for these projects, 14.5 has been from the CPRA. CPRA does have surplus funding that the state legislature cannot tap into to balance the state's deficit. So there is funding available still for our levee project that we can go after. With the Restore Act, everybody knows of the BP oil spill, and BP, there's currently a court case which will decide the amount of fines that BP has to pay to the U.S. Treasury as a result of that spill. And the state and our parish will get direct allocations from the U.S. Treasury once those fines are paid. We don't know yet exactly how much, but we do know that we are going to get a share of it. The Go Mesa funding is Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act funding that our state and our parish gets a share of as a coastal parish. It's oil leasing revenue that we get annually. It's been not a significant amount in the past several years, but in 2017 is slated to increase hopefully more significantly if oil revenues increase. And we should be getting a larger share of that based on some legislation that Congress recently passed. FEMA hazard mitigation grants, if you're a parish employee, you know we've done several of these already for drainage projects, elevation projects, hazard mitigation plan updates. We can use this type funding to fund the construction of some of the pump stations that Buddy mentioned earlier. DOTD statewide flood control funding, that program is currently funding a large portion of the Willow Ridge phase of the West Bank levee that Buddy showed you on the map. And it's possible maybe in the future we could get some potential funding from them. And last but certainly not least is the Parish General Fund. If we do see spikes in tax revenue, our Parish Council could decide to continue in the future on an annual basis to appropriate more funding to the levee fund so that we could work on these projects. The last slide that I have, I just wanted to show our financial outlook with and without the passing of the millage. As we've already said, the current funding that we have on hand is designated for projects and will be depleted once those projects are, construction is finished. In the grants office, with the majority of the grants that we work with, the programs require that we have a local matching share, that we are invested in those projects. And that means that we have to have the funding set aside, committed via budget, via a resolution from the council, saying that we have that funding set aside in order to apply for that grant funding. So if we do not have that funding available to commit, then that's going to hinder our efforts to apply for additional grant funding, these leveraging efforts that I spoke about earlier. And, you know, we've done a lot over the past 7 years. Sam and the levee team, we've really come far just in getting the 3 permits that we've gotten to be able to construct the levee. That's been huge milestones. It's been costly, the $15.6 million. There's a lot of front-end costs in that, land acquisition, surveying, soil boring, $6.5 million of mitigation fees alone. And we're to the point now where we've gotten a lot of the designs nearing completion, and some of them are going to be sitting on the shelf when we run out of this funding. And we don't want to see our permits expire for these projects and those projects not be able to be constructed because we run out of funding. We've had great momentum. We want to see it continue. And that's the message we're trying to get across to people, that we need you to go vote if you think, you know, we've made good progress and you have faith in our abilities to leverage this funding, then please get out there and go vote.
I want to make one comment that Holly and Sam have been able to, in the past 18 months and the next 4, put out 5 phases of our levee out for construction, out for bid, and get them under construction. And by the end of the year, we'll have another 3 of that total 5. The Corps studied since 1968 that East Bank levee. And so when this parish gets money, we leverage it, we get dollar for dollar, and then we move it, and we build protection, and we protect our people. And so we feel this is setting up future administrations and councils that if we give our people the tools, we'll get flood protection over time. And we get asked 2 questions, why now and then how long? The why now, just like in wastewater, annual costs keep going up. Those pump stations, as we build another one, we're about to go out to bid for Willow Ridge. That's another $80,000 to $120,000 a year. That has to come from somewhere. So these costs keep going up. We're currently fighting with the Corps about how much we have to set aside for that little bitty portion in AMA. So these costs keep going up, and we have to have these dollars in an account. The second bullet, I always like to make a point of it, because I deal with the politics of what we do a lot, and that is in the past, the politicians, the council, the parish president, they could blame D.C. Well, D.C.'s studying it, D.C.'s building it, we're waiting on D.C. to come in. Those days are gone. We have to build flood protection led by the local government and the levee districts if we want flood protection, because waiting just doesn't cut it. D.C. is broke. The state gives us money as matches, but they're not going to lead. We have to lead this effort. And flood insurance, unfortunately, for the past couple of years, has made it all the more evident why we have to build and keep building. And for flood maps, and St. Charles is probably one of the smartest areas in the country on flood insurance because we unfortunately were one of the worst hit areas. They map a levee if it's authorized and money's available. And so by having the money available, we can get projects put on a flood map even before they're built. And so again, that helps us moving forward. The last question we get is how long? We're looking at 10 to 15 years if all the money is available. That portion on the East Bank that the Corps built that protects like St. Rose, Destrehan, New Sarpy, and Narco, that took them about 10 years to build, and the Corps had almost a blank check. And so we figure to build the entire system, East Bank and West Bank, we're looking at about 10 to 15 years. And we keep reiterating this point. This is not about just the West Bank flood protection. This is a parish-wide St. Charles complete flood protection system now, and we have to start thinking of it that way. Flood insurance is done on a parish-wide basis. Master plan projects at the Corps and at the state level, they're thought about as regional projects and parish-wide projects, and they're studied that way. We can't think by district, by neighborhood, or by bank. This is a parish-wide proposition, both wastewater and flood protection. We're trying to get away from this, and I'm not talking about a school bus in the water. I'm talking about communities that can't get back to normal quickly after a storm comes through. Because when your community's protected, you evacuate for a few days, you come back and you get back to work, go back to school, industries get to turn themselves back on sooner. If your community's flooded, you're at weeks and months of recovery. And so we want to get to where our people leave to be safe, but they come back to a dry home and get back to work instead of recovering like we've seen some of our neighbors have to do for weeks and months. Second to last slide. Early voting starts Saturday, and it goes all of next week, and then Election Day is May 2nd. We've been trying to get people to understand where general government fits in the property tax world. Your property tax bill, whether it's $500, $0, or $2,000, $3,000. All of that does not come to VJ St. Pierre and the Parish Council. 53% goes to the school board, 30-something% goes to the sheriff, the libraries are in there, the hospitals, their bonds are in there. All of that goes into that property tax bill. General government, what VJ and the council have authority over, is 14% of your total tax bill. Just 14% to do everything from recreation to sewage and everything in between. And so we're asking the voters to consider these millages because the flood protection costs are just too great to do it alone and on an annual basis, and wastewater needs support from another revenue source. And the other reason we keep saying that this request is justified or affordable is in 1999, that sewer millage we're asking you to renew was 6.92 mils. That's because millages brought in a little less back then, but over the years we've lowered it from 6.92 to now it's 2.2 because we only collect to pay the bill. That's it. We don't collect extra on that millage. But if you and the public vote on May 2nd to renew that millage for 2.2, so keep it there, and pass the flood protection for 3.6, it's a total of 5.8 that we're asking the voters to consider on May 2nd. That's less than we got in 1999. And so that's where we feel this is justified. We're not asking for 20 mils and 15 mils and 30 mils to go build this levee. We're asking for less than we got at the turn of the millennia back in 1999. Wastewater is a renewal, no new cost, no new taxes, so your property tax bill stays the same. The levee millage or flood protection millage is 3.6 new mills or $36 a year for the average homeowner. And this presentation, every video, every PowerPoint, chart, graph, budget, and map is available on that website that Renee and Tristan have put together over the past couple of months, and it's a great website with all the information, SCPfundingthefuture.com. We've got a few more public presentations. We've got a few more employee information sessions. But guys, if you, your relatives, your neighbors have any questions, we believe these information sessions show that these propositions are needed. We can't ask you to vote for it or vote against it. All we can do is inform you. But we feel the more that people know, the easier it is for them to make a decision on May 2nd.